How's it going, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to walk you guys through how to interact and work with the Eve platform. I've done a video in the past where I walked you guys through the install process and how to take operating systems and upload them to the platform itself and things like that. This video is going to be a little bit more on the back end once you have everything your operating system's already uploaded and things like that. How you would drag and drop and connect things together. Now this is Eve Pro. I have a lot of options over here on the left hand side where Eve Community version doesn't have all that. As you can see, there's a number of options that aren't there. But I'm be working with Eve Pro. But the way that Eve Pro and Eve Community work is pretty much the same thing. Pro has hot add interfaces where Eve Community does not. So you're basically paying for the luxury. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is going through and showing you guys how to basically build a topology. So I'm trying to do something that works. There we go. That should work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build I'm going to build out a topology for firewall the ASA. Basically, I want to test out a bunch of ASA firewall capabilities and stuff like that. Let me zoom out a little bit. That works. So I've got dark reader enabled, which is this guy right here, because I can't stand looking at a white background because it drives me nuts. So I've already uploaded the ASA operating systems to Eve, and I have both versions of ASA. I have when I say that, I have the ASA, the VM, and I have ASA V. So if you have the option of downloading this guy to do multiple context mode and clustering, I highly recommend you do it. If you don't, then I suggest you go find it. It is online. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and close out of the lab. You will be presented with this as soon as you log in. And so this is the Eve Pro landing page. You'll be delivered to here. And these three files here, labbing, Nexus, and SD-WAN, they will not exist. I created those. And what you'll do is you'll come in here and you create a file. To do that, you just click on New Lab. You give it a name and you click on Save. I've already done that, so I'm not going to redo that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on labbing.unl. And this is a blank workspace. So no one node inside lab. So what I'm going to do is I want to go and add some ASA firewalls. So my plan here is test out multiple context mode, transparent mode, and routed mode, and then clustering for both layer 2 and layer 3, as well as ASA V in routed and transparent mode, and high availability transparent mode and routed mode. So that means I'm going to drag out a number of devices. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to right click here and click on node, and I'm going to drag out 5 ASA images. So the first 2 are going to be for multiple context mode, and what that's basically going to allow me to do is test out routed and transparent mode, multiple context mode. I've done that quite a bit already, but and then I'm going to want 3 more devices for clustering, because high availability for the ASA in multiple context mode is limited to 2 devices, where in clustering I can have 3 or more. So I want to test out both. I'm going to come down here to the Ethernet interfaces. I'm going to give it 8, and then I'm going to click down here and click on Save. So that drags that out. So I'm going to grab the first 2 ASAs, I'm going to drag them to their respective spots, and then ASA 3, 4, and 5 over to here. So that'll give me my clustering capability. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 6 ASAs. You might say, why so many? Well, because I want to be able to test them out individually. So if I run into a problem, Or if I'm like, well, I don't really feel like playing with that right now, I'm going to go play with this. This is working. I can pick and choose which device I want to go play with. So I'm going to add 6 devices. And I'm going to do that. And what these are going to do is I'm going to grab ASA6 will be a standalone device, meaning it'll be in just routed mode. ASA7 will be a standalone device in transparent mode, so it'll be a bump in the wire. But it'll be basically a switch that's got firewall capabilities. I'll do 8 and 9, which are going to be in high availability routed, and then 10 and 11, which will be in high availability transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and drag these guys up a little bit higher, like so. So now that I have everything laid out in terms of the ASAs, what I want to do now is add in some connectivity between the devices. So normally what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of IOSB routers. So this is going to be providing the connectivity between the ASAs through a routed connection, because really all we're trying to test is firewall features and things like that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add 8 routers. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to use all 8 routers, but actually let me do this in 2 sections. Let's do 2 routers and 12 ports for the connectivity between all the ASAs. Save that, and then I'll add a few more. So this guy here and down here, and then we'll go ahead and add a few more routers. Let's add 6 more. 4 ports should be more than enough. And what I'm going to do is these 2 guys here are going to connect so that they'll be basically doing BGP, and then that will allow me to take and do BGP configurations on the ASAs to do internet routing, and then do some NATs and some stuff like that. So for any connections where there's going to be any type of high availability, I want to add switches as well. So I'm going to add node, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add the switch. I'm going to come in here and SW as the name, and I'll come in here, I'll add 8 switches. 8 ports should be more than enough. And so the whole purpose of this now is to go through and have the connectivity set up the way that I need it to. So I'll take a switch and put it here between these 2 guys. I'll take a switch here between these 2 guys, or I'm sorry, these 3. And then what I'll do is for like ASA 6, which will be a routed device, I will put a router behind him. And then for ASA 7 and 10 and 11, since these will be transparent mode, I'll put a router in front of him, and I will put a router behind him. So that's transparent mode. And because, or transparent, since these are transparent all across the board, I'll add a switch here in front, because we have high availability, and I'll add a switch behind for high availability, and then I'll add a node in front and a node behind. Something like this. And then 18 will sit back here. So we'll have lots of flexibility in terms of connectivity and things like that. And then for these 2 devices down here that are just in active standby, I'll come in here and I'll put this switch here like so, and we have the high availability there for this guy, and then for 19. Now with all that being said, that's pretty much all the connectivity I need to worry about. These other few switches here, I can go ahead and just delete them. It's okay to add more devices than you need and just delete what you don't need later on. So I'll be able to take and basically start dragging and setting up connections like this. This will give me a lot of flexibility in terms of, now that I've tested this particular feature out, I can go and move on. So actually, I need to add one more switch. Should be able to, okay, because I need one to go sit in front of this, the cluster. So I'll just come in here and say switch 25. Grab the switch, SW, and then we'll give it 25 as the name. We'll place this in front of this guy and drag this back like so. And then we'll just drag a connection to here like that, and we'll be good to go there. Now, as I go through and start connecting, I try to do a connection to every node that's facing like this simulated internet, and so that I have diversity, so I can play with other things as I'm going along. So I could add in zone-based firewall or something along those lines. And the IOSV routers give me a lot of flexibility in terms of their lighter weight. They're not as heavy as the CSR 1000V, so it gives me more. It's not as heavy of a footprint. So we have that, and then I try to do the diversity on the devices. I try not to tag, because eventually I will be doing like route tracking and things like that as we go along. But for right now, what we have squared away here, actually I'll not do that one, and then I'll do, yeah, that should work. And then I'll come up here and I will do a backup connection to this guy. Actually, no, that needs to, that will match. I'm just looking at, you know what, let's just go with it. The nice thing about Eve Pro is if you're not 100% sure what you should do, you can delete a connection and always add it later on. So we have that, and then I'm going to do a link between the two, because all the links need to match when you're doing anything like the connectivity that I'm doing now. It all has to match per port, so that when the failover does happen, that it works the way that it needs to, and all of that stuff. So this is pretty much the behind the scenes that you guys never get to see. And then I always like to come in here after the fact and run cables to everything. Actually, let me go stay on this one side, and I'll drag a connection to here. Actually, let me delete that connection on this side. Let me delete this guy. Delete. And you might ask, well, why are you deleting that connection? Well, because I want to give it basically service provider diversity. I don't want to have multiple ASAs connecting to the same provider network or the same routers. So what I'll do is I will configure the ASAs to connect to different simulated internet routers, so that it gives me more flexibility in terms of where I'm going. That's why I gave it this way here, and then I'll configure this guy to be the exact same way. It'll be diversity. So we have that, and then for the switch, I'll do the same thing here. I like to give it as much, as many dual paths as I can to, and as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, okay, if I add this, does this give me enough flexibility? Does this give me enough diversity? Things like that. You know, I'm always thinking, okay, if I add this feature in later on, because I'm that kind of, I think that way. You know, what other aspects can I look at? And so I don't always do that for everything, but for a lot of things I do. So we have that. So now we've got all that squared away. I feel like I'm in pretty good shape overall. So now we have that all wired. Now it's a matter of going through and doing all this, getting all the connections squared away. Now what's cool about this too is anything that's not in routed mode, so these ASA 7, ASA 10 and 11 down here, what basically will end up happening is I don't have to throw them immediately into transparent mode. I can keep them in routed mode, and then they can act as the edge of a network. So I can do some dynamic routing with them. I can do ASA. I can do like EIGRP and OSPF and stuff like that. I can take full advantage of whatever routing capabilities that they have. So that's basically how I look at this. So this is basically how I would lay all this stuff out. Give it a minute here to to finish doing its job. This time it gets a little pokey at this point, so it is what it is. I'm going to go ahead and refresh it completely. For some reason, it's liking to take its sweet old time. Now, this is I'm gonna wait for that one just for a minute. I'm gonna do this one here to try to get the rest of these connections completely done before we're at an hour. I mean, we're only 15 minutes in, but this is basically what I end up doing. I go through and I lay it all out. I move the devices around to try to make it, work the way that I need to. If you get a situation like this where the devices aren't lined up I mean, to me, I don't really care, but if you're the type of person that likes to have things even, you can do a horizontal align, and it'll automatically line them up for you. I like to drag them around a little bit so that I personally like having the interface labels. They're going to be on the left side of the router. I don't like one being on the left and one being on the right, and if I can help it. So that little bit of OCD, but we're going to come in here and do this one next. This will be a transparent one. So I have a lot of testing to do on the transparent side of the house. I haven't really dealt with that too much. So actually, I'm thinking about it. I need to add one there too for the high availability, because there is the ability of doing stateless and stateful high availability. So we'll just go ahead and make sure that all these connections are equal. If they're not equal, high availability won't work. There's kind of a check on the back end to say, okay, do the interfaces that I have set up match? And they have to match. That's one thing I learned a long time ago when I started playing with high availability. It's like, oh, I'll just willy-nilly connect everything and it'll just work. And it didn't. So I like to make sure that my connections are solid as I'm going about it. And stuff like that. So there's that. So these connections, let me go ahead and just add another one between these two just to make sure that I've got everything squared away. And this should run pretty light. I've also done this with the Dynamips routers, which are really lightweight. They only take a couple hundred megs of RAM, and they run really, really lean. So, which is nice considering if you're, on a local, let's say you're running Eve VMware Workstation and you only have 8 gigs of RAM to allocate, obviously you won't be able to run 12 or 14 ASAs. You'll be able to run a couple of ASAs and a couple of really lightweight routers. I've got more horsepower to throw at this than I've got a dedicated server with 128 gigs of RAM and a pretty beefy CPU. So I've got the flexibility of having multiple devices running at one time. So gives me lots of flexibility. As you can see, I'm running multiple Eve instances across the board because I can. So I'm going to go ahead and okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag these connections across the board here and get them all squared away. But that's basically what the situation is. So once you do all of this, the clustering capability comes into play. I've never done clustering before. I generally understand what it's trying to accomplish, but I figure if I have a sizable lab, that'll give me the flexibility of doing the connectivity and things like that. So beyond that, go ahead and save that config as well. And once I'm all squared away here, this should be all ready to go. And then it's a matter of powering devices on and figuring out the IP address scheming and things like that. But as you can see, it's not terrible to get a lab built. That's why when people ask me can you share your lab topology? And I'm like, well, I mean, I kind of already am. I'm taking the time to record a video on it. So here you go. all you have to do is basically pause the screen and drag and drop the nodes. Do I do a lot of the IP addressing? Do I lay it out like it's like a course that you would pay for? Oftentimes I don't, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll grab some sort of addressing scheme. You can throw whatever addressing scheme you want at it. So, for example, with the way that I look at this, I'm going to look at this from the perspective of I want to connect. If I'm going to be doing private IP addressing, I can use that, but I normally like to make it as real world as I can. So, for example, what I would do between 12 and 13 here, I would have like some sort of the first octet of a public IP. So 1 dot something, so it's easy to type in. So 1.12.13.12/24, and I would just run a /24 link between these two connections here. And then after I've got that squared away, then it would be, maybe this is 12.1.12 because I'm connecting to ASA2, and 12.12.25 or something along those lines. I still have to learn the clustering side of the house to see if there's anything about that I would need to be worried about, but I don't. So I'm not going to worry about IP addressing that right now. This other connection down here to ASA6, that would be a 12.6.12.6. So just repeat the numbering scheme a couple of times so you know who's connecting to who, or 12.13.12.12 or 12. Come up with some scheme that makes sense to you so that when you're doing a trace route or you're looking at the config, you can be like, okay, I know what that would be. I usually always use the device number in my addressing scheme so that it's easy to identify. And I can quickly go, okay, if I'm down here and I've got 10. For example, maybe this switch 24 here is a transparent device and it's ASA 8 and ASA 9 are my endpoints. So what I would do if I'm going to be configuring the interface, I would say, let's say 10.8.19 or 10.9.19, stuff like that. I always try to go from numerically low to numerically high. The second octet of an IP address will be the lower IP address on that connection. So in this case here, we have 6 and 14. I would do 10.6.14.0/24, and so that I always know logically where it goes. So that makes it easier from a implementation perspective. Okay, what else do I have to work with? So it gives me a lot of flexibility in terms of how that comes into play. So that's basically how I go about building my labs. And then I can go and I can sit through some training, or I can, go back through and be like, okay, what don't I know? What am I missing? Things like that. So it gives me a lot of flexibility. This also allows me to do some VPN stuff, so I can test out some. This is more or less going to be a firewall topology. And the cool thing about it is, when I look at the status, like their utilization wise, there's nothing going on the server. So I have lots of capability. So I can start spinning these devices up. Am I going to spin all of them up at one time? Probably not. I'm gonna spin up a couple of devices. I might spin up. I can pretty much promise you that I'll spin up 12 and 13. I'll get them configured and squared away, and I'll do BGP peerings with them, and I'll do redistribute connected so that they're exchanging routes with each other and things like that. And beyond that, I don't need to care about anything beyond that. Those devices are just acting as transit devices for the rest of the topology. And if I want to form a BGP peering here and do NAT, I can do NAT on these devices. There's a lot of things that I can throw at this topology. Is it huge? I mean, there's 25 QEMU devices, yes, but that gives me flexibility, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the ability to be able to test out whatever I want to test out on my own terms. So, sure, there's a lot going on here, but if you're limited on what you can do, then whack 70% of this topology. So that's pretty much how I look at it and how I go about doing whatever it is I'm going to go do, because it gives me the flexibility to do this. I can lab up whatever I want, and that's the whole point, is taking advantage of that. So it's one of those things where take it for what it is, not for what it's not. So it'll give you a lot of flexibility and stuff like that. But that's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys how to do. You can add text here if you want to do IP addressing and things like that. I'm not going to worry about that right now because it doesn't matter. But understand the logic. Use whatever IP addressing scheme you want. I get a little frustrated when people ask me to share the topology files and stuff like that. It's but anything that I put on YouTube, it's me playing with something, and I normally don't share anything topology file wise, because if something's not working or what have you, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to ask me for help, and the help that I'm giving you is giving you a platform, or at least a set of devices connected to each other to do whatever it is you're going to do. I mean, so it's on you to make it work. If it's not working, well, maybe you're doing something wrong. But I don't spend a ton of time trying to get everything up and running just to, provide free consulting services over the internet. So I got to be careful of my time. So, but that's pretty much it, guys. That's what's up. If you have any questions pertaining to Eve or anything like that, leave a comment below. Like the video, subscribe. Catch you guys later.